All right, welcome back. So now that we have the AI set up, we only have one character here. We need to set up more characters, but it's time to start setting up some weapons. We're going to use a crossbow for this assignment. This will give us an opportunity to kind of put together a lot of the stuff we've already built. Now, I've prepared a package of things for you to use to explore this. It is available on the forums. The way that you'll import it is you'll download it and then we'll just import a package, a custom package. Then wherever you've got that downloaded to, I've got it inside of here, then you'll see this AI package called Crossbow. When you open this crossbow, it's got a bunch of stuff in it, some things already prepared, some things that we'll have to do a little bit of work with. So this will unzip into a crossbow folder. Several things that I want to kind of point out that are in this folder. One, the original FBX files are in the FBX folder. If you look at any of these, for instance, the light crossbow has not only the geometry but the rigs, but some animations already set up for you. So those are a little bit easier to use. The materials and textures are set there. There's also a physics material for the crossbow, and then a couple of prefabs. So the first thing we want to do is start to set up these prefabs so that we can see them in the scene. I'm going to start off with the light crossbow, make sure it's a child of my camera. So I'll just come and drag it, drop it onto the camera here, make sure that it's positioned. Let's start with 0, 0, 0 here to get this set up. Let's frame the scene. This will require us, of course, to kind of pull this down and out. Now you'll notice that probably in this case I don't want that crossbow to be so blurred out. That's because of my post-processing. So I'm going to come into my post-processing volume and let's scroll down to the depth of field. I'm going to turn the depth of field off for now. All right, so meanwhile I can kind of come in and fix this crossbow so that it can be set up like I want it to be in the scene. Now remember, it looks like I've got some clipping that's happening there that I can fix by just coming in and adjusting the near clipping plane. Let's do, say, 0.1 to kind of fix that. Okay, so once we've got that crossbow generally where we want, oops, I moved the camera instead, then we can kind of figure out where exactly that ought to be. Make sure that you get it set up in your scene appropriately. You can look at this crossbow and see that it already has an animator on it. It already has an avatar. This was set up before, but notice that it's missing the controller. It has no way for us to actually control which animations to use. So I'm going to keep everything in the crossbow folder. So to do this, I'll select the crossbow folder, come down and choose an Animator Controller. This I'll call Crossbow Controller. And then while I'm at it, so that I don't forget, I'm just going to go ahead and plug that controller right in so we're ready to go. Now that that's in there, now I have the ability to start to actually choose what animations are fired when. So you'll see that I might need to, as I start to rearrange my set or my camera view, then I'll need to have that. If you got two monitors, make sure you got your game on a full screen. Okay, so you could also put it right down the middle, I guess. I'm going to put it over to the side, though. That's how I prefer to play. Okay, so we need to start working with this controller. Now remember, the controller, if I double click on it, will bring up a window like this that allows me to define which animations play at what time. So again, maneuvering here is similar to what you'd expect. Scroll allows you to zoom in and out. Middle mouse drag allows you to move around, or Alt and left mouse drag allows you to move. So the animations for this are actually a child of the FBX. So I can come up not to the bolt, to the crossbow, and I'm going to make sure that I have the idle, which is just a single frame where it's just set, not doing anything, the draw, where it pulls back, and the fire. Now notice I pulled the idle out first because it automatically connects the entry, so that's where it's at. What I wanted to do is when I press the fire and hold it, then we will move from the idle to the draw. So let's make a transition there. When I release the fire button, it's going to move from the draw to the fire. So I'll make a transition there. And then after it fires, I want it to go back to the idle. So I'm going to tie those three together. Now I need to make sure that I have conditions that will allow it to move through these transitions. Here I will make the space a little bit bigger. So in order to make this happen, come on now. Oh, not letting me. In order to make this happen, then I need to start building in some other booleans. So I'll build in a boolean called isDrawing. I'll create another boolean called isFiring that will allow us to move through theirs. And then every time I finish firing, I'm going to have it move back to idle. So I actually don't need another boolean in that spot. All right, so setting these up, there's some things that should be pretty easy. So for instance, when we're moving from idle to draw, then of course you want to come down and make the condition isDrawing true. When I'm moving from draw to fire, then as we've looked at before, I'll use isFiring to true to move over there. And then from fire back to idle, we're just going to leave that so that it automatically does that, automatically shifts back there. Now there is one thing that's going to become important here. As I move from idle to fire, I definitely don't want to have an exit time. I want it to just fire that whenever I let go of the mouse. Second of all, you can see that what it's doing is it's cross-fading. Between draw and fire, I want to have no idle time, or no exit time. When you'll see that what it's doing is as I move from draw to fire, that there's a transition. I don't want there to be a transition. I want it to fire kind of right away. So there's a couple different ways you can do this. You can kind of try sliding stuff around, or the easiest thing to do is actually just slide this up like that, and then you just kind of slide that right back over there to 0. So that what happens is wherever draw is, it will immediately just jump into fire. Now I'm actually going to do the same thing after the fire is done. I'm going to go ahead and make it so there's no transition here as well, and put that right to 0 so that fire right into idle is how that works. Okay, so the animator now is set up, but in order for the animator to work, and by the way, I've got fire set so that it has an exit time. In order for this animator to work, I've got to write the code that will make this function. So let's create a piece of code here, some C# that I'm going to call my crossbow script. And this is how I'll control that crossbow. So let's go in and edit the script. This script is going to need to know several things, and we'll build this in steps. I'm not going to hang this script off of the crossbow itself. I'm actually going to go and hang it off of another object so that I can keep track of it there. Let's go ahead and click yes here. But it will be important that this script knows the animator, because that's the way that I'm going to be able to control those animations. And of course it needs to know who the crossbow is. So let's get rid of this for now. I'm going to come in and let's make a public game object that I'm going to call crossbow, so this script will know the crossbow. Second, I'm going to make an animator variable that is going to be called crossbow animator. Let's use the same format that we're using everywhere, crossbow animator. So when we get started, let's hit start. Let's make sure that the script knows who the animator is. So crossbow animator is going to be equal to, we'll populate that crossbow variable out in the editor, but it'll be crossbow dot get component animator. Like so. What this means is that from now on, anytime I need to talk to the animator on the crossbow, I can just call out crossbow animator. All right, so now let's start listening for input. So inside of an update function, because we want to do this every frame, I'm going to say if input dot get button. Now I'm not using get button down, because remember get button down only listens for the input on the frame that we push down. What this does is this holds it down the entire, this reads the input while we hold the button down. So I'm going to use get button and we'll use fire 1 so that it's set there. And then what we'll do here is start turning on those booleans. So while I'm holding that fire 1 down, what we'll do is go to crossbow animator. There we will set the boolean and let's set isDrawing to true. And let's do crossbow animator. We'll do set boolean isFiring to false. Now there's better ways to actually do this than these booleans. There's some other things called triggers and some other things that will work better in the animator, but for now, for what we know, we'll kind of do this slightly clumsy way because it'll just be a little bit easier to kind of assemble it. Now the idea is that when I let go of the fire button, we want it to actually fire off the bolt. So we'll say if input dot get button up, so the frame that we release the fire one button, what we want it to do is just the opposite of these two. So let's just copy those, put them in, make sure that is drawing is set to false. Let's say that is firing is set to true. Okay, so we'll save, come back to Unity. Assuming we don't have any compiling errors, I need a place to hang this, so I'm going to create a let's create an empty game object. This empty game object I'm going to call script holder, like we did last time. Script holder. In the script holder, I'm just going to stick it at 000 in world space, although it doesn't need to be. Meanwhile, the crossbow script needs to be plugged into here. This is where it's going to do. This script needs to know who the crossbow is, so we go and grab the one that's actually attached to our camera. That becomes kind of important. And then remember, the script is going to look on that object when it starts and automatically find the animator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to leave this open so you can see what happens. But what should happen now is that when I start the game, then we should immediately move into the idle state. So we can see idle playing, and it just plays one. As I press and hold the fire button, then you see that we slide to the draw animation, and you saw that the animation in the crossbow actually worked as well. Now when I let go, then we see the fire happen, and it automatically moves to idle. So as I press and hold, it pulls back, let go, it fires. If I press and hold and then let go partway through, then it automatically fires the weapon from there. All right, now I need to do a few other things. For one thing, I think that fire is way too slow. I mean, I don't believe that's going to fire anything very quickly. I can do a few adjustments by coming into the actual animations. So I'm clicking on the actual fire animation, and there's actually the ability to change the speed here. So let's say that I change that to 2. Let's play again and see what that looks like, see if that's a little snappier. So when I press and hold that and let go, yep, that feels better. Might even change the speed to 3 times the speed, but 2 looks like it's working pretty well. Okay, so let's continue on and do some visual stuff. We're going to do the old switcheroo trick that we've done repeatedly here. I'm going to put a dummy version of the bolt in there that loads up and everything, and then when I actually fire it, I'm going to instantiate another version of the bolt. So the way that we'll do this is if you look inside of the crossbow folder, there's actually a bolt prefab. Now this bolt prefab has some stuff on it that we don't want, and we'll clean that off in a second. But for now, what I want you to notice is that if I start looking at the prefab, then I've got some geometry, but I also have in here some of the, here, let's come and look at it in this other window. I also, here, let me change the gizmos to quite a bit smaller. I'll also have in here some other assets that these are actually joints that are there. So there's the handle, there's the string mid, and there's the trigger. The string mid actually is the the string mid is actually the place that actually holds the back of that bolt. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring the bolt in and make it a child of that spot. Now there's been a little bit of setup here that I just kind of want to let you know about. You don't need to worry about this, but namely the bolt has been set up so that the axis is at the back of the bolt so that it's an easy place to go, and notice that the positive Z is actually facing forward on that bolt as well. So if I take the bolt prefab and I come and I'm going to drag it onto the string mid so that it becomes a child of that, you can see that there's a bunch of stuff going on here. I'm going to turn off the light probes, even though you can leave that if you want. I'm also going to make sure that the position is 0 in relationship to that, and that the rotation is 0 in relationship to that bolt prefab, or to that string mid. So when that string mid moves, it will take the bolt prefab with it. Now, There are a few other things that I want you to notice here. This bolt prefab has a rigid body and a capsule collider. The only reason why this is important is here, let me just show you what goes wrong, is that right now if I play the game, then that bolt will just drop. It just falls out of the crossbow. You could actually see it there on the floor. Just kind of bounced around. It's rolling away somewhere now. And we don't want that to happen. We want it to actually stay on that. So what I'm going to do is this version that we have our dummy bolt. In fact, let's just call it dummy bolt. Our dummy bolt, I'm going to remove the rigid body and I'm going to remove the capsule collider because neither of those are important. And in fact, if they are there, it actually makes things work poorly. So what will happen now is that as I click on play, let's look down here on the with our situation. When I press and hold the fire button, then that actually pulls that bolt back. When I release, we see that move forward. See that snap forward. I don't know, 2 actually still seems slow to me. So maybe I'm gonna, let's adjust that just a little bit. I'm gonna take that fire and tell that to be set to 3. So I want to make sure yep, those are not overlapping. Okay. And draw. All right, sounds good. Okay, so what we'll do then is, here, let me just show you once. Let's maximize on play so we can see the effect of this. So when I press play and we go full screen here, then a speed of 3, when I press and hold, then that pulls back and cocks. When I release, then that gets ready to shoot forward. All right, let's continue to build on this idea real quick. We can continue to work with our crossbow script. We need to make sure if we're going to do the switcheroo, let's go ahead and do a public game object that is going to be that's going to keep track of the dummy bolt, and let's keep track of a variable that keeps track of the bolt. Although since we know that bolt's going to have a rigid body on it, let's just go ahead and do rigid body here because we're going to add velocity to it as it goes on. So what will happen is when I release the fire, this is when I actually want it to go ahead and fire that bolt. So let's do all this same thing that we've done again and again and again. Rigid body, this will be the clone bolt. What we'll do is clone bolt will immediately be filled by instantiating the bolt at wherever the dummy bolt dot transform dot position is, and we'll go ahead and use the dummy bolt's rotation too. Dummy bolt dot transform dot rotation. So that will instantiate this new bolt there, and then we'll give that clone bolt some juice, some velocity. So we'll do velocity will be equal to, let's just use the dummy bolt's location, dummy bolt dot transform direction, and we'll use vector 3 dot forward because remember we had that set up, and then let's multiply it by I don't know, well, we'll try 10. We might adjust that later as we go. Now in this same frame that we instantiate that, let's also go ahead and take the dummy bolt and let's do a set active false. We'll just turn it off really quick. So right now we're not reloading or anything, and this should look fairly familiar. We've built this kind of method before. But let's come and save this, make sure we don't have any syntax errors, and see what it does. Okay, let's come back out to the scene folder, or to the scene view. It's going to be a little tricky to see this, but let's see what goes on here. So let's not maximize on play for a second. Let's make sure that the script holder knows what everything is. So it needs to know who the dummy bolt is. So let's go ahead and put the dummy bolt. It needs to know who the bolt is, which we'll use the bolt prefab, because remember it's got a rigid body on it. It's got all the things that we need. And now as I click play, then when I press and hold, it should lean back, and then when I let go, then it looks like it fires that bolt forward. Okay. Now, one last thing, since we got a little bit of time, let's go ahead and build in the reload. So let's start a coroutine that's going to be reload bolt. We'll go ahead and put that in there. This should all look awfully familiar because we've done it a bunch of times. So let's create an Ienumerator that we're going to call reload bolt. Reload bolt will do a simple thing. We'll just have it yield return new wait for seconds. Let's have it wait for, let's try 1 second. And then we'll go ahead and turn that dummy bolt back on. So that we can see that actually work. Now let's do one more thing. Let's make sure that we can't just fire this like a machine gun. Let's make a Boolean called can fire bolt. Let's make sure that at the start we can fire the bolt. But let's make it that when we fire it, that we say can fire bolt is false, so that we can't, we shouldn't be able to fire it. And then here, after we've waited for the second, can fire bolt will be set to true. And then we'll just make sure that here, all of this stuff, we won't let the user do that at all unless they can fire the bolt. So if can fire bolt is true, then go ahead, oops, then go ahead and do this work. So we'll take all of this content right there, let's cut it and put it right into there, so that if we can't fire the bolt, if we're reloading, then it will just ignore when somebody actually presses the fire button. Okay, so let's save, go back to Unity. All right, so now when I press play, I'm going to press and hold that, fire it off. It should wait for a second, and then the bolt should reappear. And it's not. Let's see where we've got that wrong. Okay, start coroutine, reload bolt. Oh, because this should be set to true, of course. Okay. All right, so we'll recompile. Silly mistake. So when we press and hold, then that fires, and then after a second, a new one comes back, fires. So maybe even 1 second might be too fast. Maybe we assume that it's going to take longer than that. So we can kind of play with that. Maybe I'm going to set this to 2. Maybe I'll set our velocity to, I don't know, 8. It seemed to be reasonable. So save. You'll have to play with the numbers, find out what works best. As you really are trying to play with the numbers, it'd probably be best to make those values public so that you can just go and change them and not have to recompile all the time. But what this should allow us to do, I can fire that, see what happens. All right. So I am firing this. All right. Now the next thing that we want to do in the next tutorial is we want to start making it so that we can actually fire and have a good target, a good reticle. But get to this point and then we'll move on to the next one.